This is the most ridiculous moment in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It stands out in the minds of many fans for all the wrong reasons, and those reasons are totally justified. However, this reality-defying stunt is also part of one of the greatest battle scenes ever put to film. It might sound strange, but we can't have this without this. It all comes from the mind of one man whose eye for action turned the Lord of the Rings into the unfathomably successful franchise it is today. Before we shield surf our way into this video, make sure you subscribe to Nerdstalgic so you don't miss out on whatever we release next. We've talked about Legolas and the issues with his super elven abilities on this channel before. Watching the supposedly dignified Prince of the Woodland Realm do his best impression of Tony Hawk was an affront to many viewers when The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers was released in 2002. The moment remains contentious today, but it hasn't stopped fans and critics from loving the movie. Many consider it to be the best of Peter Jackson's trilogy, and it isn't difficult to see why. The film properly introduces us to Andy Serkis as Gollum.
They're thieves. They're filthy little thieves.
Ian McKellen returns as the newly dubbed Gandalf the White, and some of the behind-the-scenes trivia is so iconic we don't even have to tell you what it is. But typically, when you ask someone what their favorite part of Two Towers is, they'll tell you it's the Battle of Helms Deep. Jackson and his writing partners Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh created an undeniably captivating moment in film history with the help of hundreds of actors, stunt people, and effects artists at Weta Workshop. Despite the 22 years since the release of Two Towers, the 40-minute long Helms Deep sequence still holds the record for being the longest battle put to film. It took 120 days to shoot, and those days often spanned a solid 14 hours. But even before it came time to step foot on set, a ludicrous amount of work went into the finer details of pre-production. It took 7 months to build the physical fortress of Helm's Deep and multiple years to finish all the miniatures, costuming, prosthetics, and animatronic puppets. Outside of the practical effects though, programmer Steven Rediculous dedicated countless hours to creating Massive, a groundbreaking AI-centered computer program that could generate huge amounts of digital soldiers and pit them against one another with varying behaviors and animations. Ultimately, all this effort resulted in around 20 hours of footage that had to be cut down and shaped into the battle we've all seen on screen. And it was well worth it. When all was said and done, Helm's Deep became the most robust example of a universal truth across all three films. The Lord of the Rings knows how to spin a heart-racing, emotionally impactful action scene that still satisfies the narrative.
Is this all you can conjure, Saruman?
And though Tolkien's work is the backbone of these movies, this is one instance where they can't be pointed to as the reason for their greatness. While Tolkien's writing stands on its own as an exceptional piece of literary fiction, detailed action and long-form battle scenes were never his focus. This proved to be a problem for the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy since it was going to be an epic fantasy blockbuster franchise. The battles needed to match that tone and scope, taking the few action-focused pages Tolkien provided, reading between the lines and translating them onto the screen isn't easy. It takes someone special to get it right. Boyens and Walsh can be credited for a good chunk of what makes Helm's Deep so incredible. The overwhelming sense of hopelessness and despair that we feel leading into the battle is all thanks to them. Bringing Haldir's soldiers to the battle as a nod to the last alliance of elves and men was also Boyens' idea, but the true magic of Helm's Deep and all the action in the Lord of the Rings movies is Peter Jackson. As Boyens said in the behind-the-scenes DVD extras for the film,
we'd come to bits where we knew there was action involved, so we'd just go, they fight. Because you just knew Peter was going to come along and do it brilliantly.
It was Jackson who pushed for the seamless blend of practical and digital effects that gave us everything from the Balrog fight to the battle at the Black Gate. He brought both Weta Workshop and programmer Steven Rediculous on board for the production. He was the one with a vision for how each scene would play out on screen and sat down with artist Christian Rivers to storyboard every detail. And yes, he was the one who decided to rig a stuntman and have him shred down a set of stairs like he was qualifying for the X Games. So what happened here? And not just here. Several unsightly little blemishes mark the otherwise pristine surface of the Lord of the Rings movies in the form of unnecessary action scenes, attempted punch-ups to existing scenes, and action one-liners.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
And they can all be traced back to Peter Jackson. So how does such a talented director with such a tight creative vision let these little slip-ups end up in the finished product? product? Well, great storytellers are often ones who take chances, whether those chances ultimately work in their favor or not. They push the boundaries of what they can do within their chosen medium and create never-before-seen artistic feats in the process. Peter Jackson is definitely one of those storytellers. That much is obvious throughout the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but his penchant for action started much earlier in his career. Jackson's journey began in childhood when he started making home movies and stop-motion shorts, but that youthful spark stuck with him as he graduated to making feature films in his 20s. Almost all of Jackson's films pre-Rings were epic on a scale that exceeded their meager budgets. Jackson's first real movie was 1987's Bad Taste, which featured practical alien suits, elaborate fight scenes, gratuitously bloody effects, and a scale model home getting blown up by a missile. His second movie, 1989's Meet the Feebles, was about a bunch of raunchy puppets in a variety show that ends with a hippo going berserk on all her co-workers. 1992's Dead Alive ramped up what was already being done with even gorier effects and creepier puppets to bring horror to the masses. Later, in 1996, the Frighteners used early CG technology to create believable ghosts. Essentially, Jackson's films always tested what was possible with the resources available to him and his team. But that's not all these early works had in common. They were also packed with memorable action scenes that drove the plot forward and boasted tongue-in-cheek humor that allowed for deeply weird moments of hyper-stylization. And in a way, this primed Jackson for The Lord of the Rings. It's hard to think of now, but the Lord of the Rings movies were a pretty big gamble. They weren't as strange and experimental as Jackson's earlier work, but they were made at a time when multi-movie franchises were still in their infancy. Expecting people to show up to 3 movies in theaters to get the full story was still a pretty new idea. Putting so much time, effort, and money into a relatively untested concept was a massive risk. Nobody had even tried to bring the grandeur of Tolkien's world to the big screen since Ralph Bakshi in the 1970s, because nobody was up to the task, but Peter Jackson was. In fact, he was singularly qualified for the job. Art is always greater than the sum of its parts, and so is the artist. Though the Lord of the Rings movies might not have the same sort of humor Jackson had become known for, his directorial fingerprints are still all over the trilogy. Action-oriented storytelling is what he always excelled at. Even if some moments veer off into borderline silly territory, flippant stunts and bizarre experiments done with earnest effort have been a part of his work since his first projects. Are the animatronic alien heads and scale model explosions in Bad Taste that much different from the roaring orcs and breach of the deepening wall in Two Towers? Are the ghosts in The Frighteners so far removed from the digital effects for the Dead Men of Dunharrow? Not really, no. They're just the next, more serious step in Jackson's career. And let's be honest here, Legolas' shield surfing moment in Helm's Deep is significantly more tame and realistic than anything that happens in Meet the Feebles.
Why did you bring it here? It's not mine. You know it's not.
When Jackson took on The Lord of the Rings, he was still that same kid at heart, making movies in his parents' backyard. That imagination, lighthearted creative spirit, and serious commitment to quality are exactly what makes his filmmaking so special. Sure, sometimes that means we have to sit through lines like this.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
But it also means we get to experience moments like this. So while it's true that not every attempt to inject some style into the movies landed, Jackson still pulled off a seemingly impossible task. He turned Tolkien's thoughtful, dense masterpiece into one of the most widely successful action-adventure franchises in Hollywood history, and it still managed to stay true to its source. His grand adventure full of incalculable armies, daring sword fights, and moments of bloodshed and glory will be remembered for decades to come. All things considered, watching Legolas skate down some stairs is a small and almost charming price to pay for such an iconic and enduring legacy. And with that, today's video comes to a close. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. If you liked what you saw, make sure you let us know by hitting the thumbs up, subscribing to Nerdstalgic, and letting us know in the comments whether you think Legolas' shield surfing works or whether it should have been cut from every edition of Two Towers.